Okay, hi everyone. My name is Louise Firth and I'm a lecturer at University College Cork in the southwest of the country. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to speak. This is literally my dream talk and you are my dream audience. So this should work, I think. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for mollusks in the room and there's a lot of enthusiasm for limpets specifically here. So you're probably wondering what the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is doing up there. All will be revealed. But for those of you who haven't seen this movie, it's basically the John le Carré. It's an adaptation of the John le Carré novel, and it's basically about a double agent, sort of in plain sight, that has multiple sort of roles. And I'm going to basically try and sort of use this analogy to sort of showcase the various roles that limpets have that we may not have necessarily recognized or appreciated. So reevaluating limpets, uncovering their overlooked role as ecosystem engineers and service providers. So I've been working on limpets since 2002. I was at University College Dublin for my undergrad and my PhD. Dave Wall demonstrated me as a student, so perhaps there might have been some influence there. Thank you, Dave. It's lovely to see you again. I started working on limpets for my undergraduate project. And I stayed on and continued in the same vein for my PhD working with Tasman Crow. And as anyone working on anything, you meet people when you're out in the field. A lot of people obviously get excited when you say you're a marine biologist, and they think marine biology. So many people say, "Oh, I always wanted to be a marine biologist. What are you working on?" And of course, you know where this is going. Do you work on dolphins? Dave did. Do you work on sharks? All this kind of stuff. And the visible disappointment when I say limpets, like jaws drop and confused looks. So much so that most of the time people had this reaction that, oh yeah, limpets, they're those things that I used to kick off the rock when I was a kid. I clearly missed something as a kid. I was not kicking limpets off the rock, but it seemed to be a bit of a pastime for many people. One person even said to me, "Oh my God, why would you work on such boring animals for 3 years?" I was shocked. So yeah, people really did not appreciate limpets. In comparison to other mollusks like mussels, oysters, cowries, which are considered gastronomic and beautiful or whatever, and ecologically important. This was not the public appreciation of limpets. And I always said, if I ever make it someday and become a professional marine biologist, I am going to fly the flag for limpets. That day came during COVID. Many of us had our little pet projects that we did during COVID, and mine was flying the flag for limpets. So it started off a bit like with me just reading the literature, and I started. This was about the ecosystem services, by the way. This is not the ecosystem engineers part of the talk. So I was thinking about the ecosystem services, and I started reading widely and Googling, doing all sorts of things. And I found myself reading incredibly widely, like just to give you some examples of the kind of journals that were coming up: Island Coastal Archaeology, Proceedings of the Prehistoric Society, Clinical and Experimental Allergy, Southeast Asian Studies, and folklore. Actually, quite a lot of my examples came from folklore journal. And to begin with, it was a little bit of a bit like Ulysses. It was a bit of a sort of a oh god, what's the term? He's just meandering. Oh god, what's the phrase? Stream of consciousness. Thank you. It was a stream of consciousness to begin with. This was me just having fun. And then it came together. I was like, this is obvious. It's got to be. Oh, actually, before that, I was very happy to discover that James Joyce in Ulysses, there is a quote about limpets. "Better not stick here all night like a limpet. This weather makes you dull." I was impressed by that. But it became clear eventually that this whole paper that I was pulling together has got to be about the provisioning services of limpets and the cultural services. We know a lot about the other regulating services and the supporting services. These were the bits that were very much overlooked. So it gave me a bit of a structure after my stream of consciousness. When I pulled the paper together, I didn't actually have a plan for where to send it. And I have copies of the paper here if you want some reading during the week. I did not know where I was going to send it when I started out on this journey. I wanted to write the paper for what I wanted it to be, and I wanted it to be as long as I needed it to be, whatever. There's not many places to send a paper like that. There is the International Journal of Environmental History, which were basically the only outlet that would take the paper in its format and length. Very happy. Not the most appealing to read. And I always knew while I was doing this, I said, nobody's ever going to read this paper or cite this paper, but I don't care. I'm going to have fun and write it anyway. But when I got the proofs of the paper, I realized, okay, I'm going to have to try and sort of encourage people to come and try and read this paper. And you can see from the title there, I came up with the title, What Have Limpets Ever Done for Us? On the past and present provisioning of cultural services of Limpets. And I thought, okay, this was sort of inspired by the famous scene from the life of Brian, what have the Romans ever done for us? And I thought, first day back in the office after COVID, I knew this was coming out soon, so I decided to prepare a little promo poster for it, which I also have a copy of here for you, all of you, printed version. And I was trying to have fun with this. You know, it's like science communication, you know, trying to encourage people to read a black and white paper. And I thought I'd play with the idea of the life of Brian scene. So poster looks a bit like this, and you can see it starts off as, what have Limpets ever done for us? And the answer is food. And then it's done in comic book style through with the various different sort of ecosystem services. But I hope you appreciate my attempt. This was done in PowerPoint, by the way. This is the level of my skill when it comes to animation. But I really tried to evoke the cover of the life of Brian. You see the three wise men and the hills and the font and everything. I bore myself with talks. I tried to liven it up for myself. So anyway, I have a copy of that for everyone, should you be interested. All right, okay, so let's get into the detail then. So what have Limpets ever done for us? Well, you already know the answer to the first one. It's food, okay? If you look in middens, and given the audience, I do not need to explain what a midden is, I'm sure. Middens obviously are found globally, and of course you have shellfish middens, which are predominantly shellfish, and occasionally you do actually have limpet middens, which are predominantly limpets. And we know from the literature that limpets were eaten by Neanderthals and early modern humans. And of course, obviously, they in many societies, they were actually commercially farmed and commercially collected as well. So there was an industry in many different countries. But just a quick sort of overview of some research that we've been doing. We've been looking at the evidence from the literature of middens globally to see when and where limpets have been found in middens globally. And they really have been found in many parts of the world. That obviously doesn't tell us that people were eating them, but it does tell us something that they were either maybe part of their diet or possibly used as bait linked to their diet. So that's just a work in progress, which we're hoping to advance. Many of you might have heard of Aristophanes, the Greek poet. This poem here, Assemblywomen, it's actually one of the, in the Latin characters, it's one of the longest words ever written. It's basically just a continuous continuation of words that makes up basically the poem. And it's a recipe. And you can see here the actual recipe. First word of it is actually limpets. But look at the recipe: oysters, saltfish, skate, lampreys, birds' brains, blackbirds. Definitely not a recipe for the vegans. Pretty insane. But I love the fact that Limpets made it into an Aristophanes play about a recipe. So yeah, we know that the Greeks were also eating limpets as well. But in modern times, there are many places that still eat limpets. Okay, we're talking sort of the last 200 years, say. Okay, one of the places that I discovered, I was not aware of this before, but in Hawaii, limpets are a delicacy. And these are just, they're known as opihi locally. They're very highly valued. They're used in all sorts of ceremonial sessions and they're also, they're referred to as fish of death. Obviously, they're not a fish. But the reason they're called this is because so many people die every year collecting them. I don't know if any of you have been to Hawaii, but it's obviously very wave exposed environments. And they've been wiped out from the more sheltered environments. So people take huge risks to actually collect them. There is actually a formal government report that actually does state that more deaths, human deaths, are related to limpets than any other marine animal in Hawaii. Crazy stuff. And they're also known as Omakua. So Omakua are basically the spirits of people's ancestors. And things like sharks, owls, whales, for instance, are often considered Omakua, but limpets are probably a lesser known example from Hawaii. So yeah, just showing you they have huge cultural relevance in Hawaii beyond just being food. And here's a nice etching showing you the risks that people take collecting limpets from the shore. I think it's actually a very accurate depiction of limpets, and you can see these huge waves threatening to crash on the shore where they're collecting. Mexico, I have a specimen in my bag to show you. This beast here is Scutellastra mexicana. It's the largest limpet that has ever been and probably ever will be. Used to be distributed from Mexico all the way down to Peru, now only found on a handful of islands off the west coast of Mexico. So really has been over-harvested and threatened and endangered to near extinction. So people have obviously been collecting these for quite a long time. You can imagine you could feed a family for a week of one of those animals. They're referred to as lapa locally. But this is another place where they are highly valued as food, but they've been nearly wiped out to extinction. And I can show you a fairly small individual that I took from the library, or sorry, from the museum in UCC that I can show you. Ireland, I figured, we can't not talk about Ireland while we're here at this meeting. Locally, they're referred to as Borneach, which is the Irish word for limpet. But if you speak to Irish people, they'll probably be thinking words like famine, destitution, and survival rather than fish of death and Omakua. We have quite an interesting relationship with limpets, and there's quite a few proverbs that are linked to limpets that really showcase this destitution, survival, famine link, and I'll show you in a sec. So this is an image here from the Illustrated London News from 1886. In the 1800s in Ireland, there was a series of famines, not just the major famine from 1845 to 51, but this one here is showing you from Inishbofin, which is on the northwest coast, and it's actually titled "Famine Collecting Seaweed and Limpets for Food on Inishbofin Island in 1886." And one of the quotes, the Irish proverbs that I mentioned, you can imagine the joy when I realized this proverb. Shock on Tornia, no Borneach is Bahadich, which translates loosely as avoid the public house or you'll end up poor and eating limpets, which is pretty savvy advice, really. And that's not the only one that shows this. There are quite a few proverbs that really make this link about limpets not being, if you're eating limpets, you're not doing well in your life, basically. So really quite a different sort of relationship in Ireland in comparison to Mexico and Hawaii. Similarly, in Scotland, very similar sort of relationship with limpets. Again, there's a huge link that I've been told that limpets are actually classed as synonymous with the Highland clearances in Scotland, and very much the destitution survival link is very evident here as well. I have a copy of the Silver Darlings as well as a little showpiece if anyone wants to have a flick through and see the limpet references in there. So, are you aware of the connection between limpets and Shackleton? Oh, good. I never want people to say yes when I ask that question. So, there is a connection. Okay, Shackleton was from not that far away from here. He was from Athy, County Kildare. And obviously we all know who Shackleton was, very famous on the expedition, many expeditions, but the most famous one where the Endurance was lost. Shackleton and was it 5 men left, and they went over to South Georgia to do the rescue mission. 22 men were left stranded on Elephant Island, obviously never knowing whether they were going to see home again. They started off obviously feeding on whatever was available to them. There were penguins and there were seals, so they were living quite well to begin with. But after they wiped out the penguins and seals, they were surviving off limpets and seaweeds. And there is a very clear quote in Shackleton's book, South, that actually refers to the moment when the men actually knew they were being rescued. Would you believe they were cooking limpets the moment they knew they were being rescued? Here's the quote. The hoosh pot, which was basically this huge pot that they used to cook in, with our precious limpets and seaweed was kicked over in the rush. There, just rounding the island, we saw a little ship flying the Chilean flag. So that was the Yell show coming around the corner with Shackleton and the others to rescue them. I think that's pretty epic. That one of the greatest adventure and survival stories of all time has limpets involved. And I did bring my own personal bottle of Shackleton if anyone would like to have a little tipple later. So I actually have South at home as well. I didn't bring that. Sorry, I should have remembered to bring South. But there you go. Yeah, Limpets featuring one of the greatest survival stories of all time. I think that's brilliant. Okay. Well, obviously food, but what else? Well, bait. Okay, I've already mentioned the idea of bait. And depending on where you are in the northeast of England, particularly on the Yorkshire coastline, they're referred to as flithers, and you have communities of women who used to be called flither lasses, and their job was basically to collect limpets, bag them up, and send them down to the southeast of England to be used as bait. In the southeast of England, there's not a huge amount of rock, so using limpets as bait was sort of limited in that capacity. So these flither lasses collected them and looked after that as a result. And there's all sorts of, this is captured in books and paintings. And this is just one example of a very beautiful painting capturing the life of these women. And thinking about the bait story, in Scotland, I think it's probably safe to say that a whole culture and language actually evolved from using limpets as bait. And I could fill this entire slide with the words that are used in Scotland for this, but I've just picked out a few. So just the cuddy is a small basket for carrying the limpet bait. Buttery is a limpet with particularly yellow shell. It's attractive bait. A sprud is the knife for prizing limpets off the rock. And then uthi, a smooth surface of water made by throwing crushed limpets. And if you're interested in that, there's many other words that are used linked to limpets being used as bait. So it's quite beautiful. And there's songs and everything that use a lot of these terms. So if you're curious, I can share all of this with you. Don't forget inspiration, okay? Obviously, a cultural service that we're interested in, inspiration has to be one of them. I don't know if you're aware of the Haida Gwaii peoples and nation off the west coast of Canada, but this is one of their central characters, Raven. And it is thought that Raven created the Haida Gwaii people initially, Raven had created 2 women to start the population, but they realized, well, we need a man, basically, if you want us to become, a population. And he threw a limpet shell at these 2 women. One of them turned into a man. And that was basically how the Haida Gwaii people came about. So quite interesting one to discover. I certainly wasn't expecting to hear that one. But yeah, inspiration, limpets certainly do inspire. No more so than this wonderful artist that I have met on my journey. This is Helen Garbett, and she is currently doing a PhD. And her project is basically about humans and limpets and that connection, but through an art perspective. And if you're interested, just look up the website. Oh my God, it is a treat. It is such a beautiful experience to look at her work. It's incredible. This is her workspace. This is life-sized. Okay, so this is a real photograph. And she has this workspace, which is basically this wonderland of limpets. It's in Birmingham, near in Dudley, if anyone actually does want to experience this physically. But she has a mobile version of it that she brought to a conference that we had on limpets in London a few years ago. And you can see here, it's just like a little miniature version of her own limpetarium at home. And you can see the various little sort of tidbits there. It's really beautiful. But she, obviously, as an artist, has been hugely inspired by limpets and that human connection. You think limpets, most people think tenacity. Okay, these things are hanging on for dear life in the most wave-exposed environments. A lot of respect for an animal that can do that. But if you look up the various sort of synonyms of tenacity, you see things like steadfastness, diligence, stamina, heart, courage, power. These are all really positive terms, if you ask me. I love the fact that if you think limpet, you're thinking all of this kind of stuff. So this tenacity idea is hugely inspiring to people and industry. You've all heard of the Limpet mine, I'm guessing. So this is basically famously designed by an English person during World War II. And the idea behind it was that basically all of the components of the Limpet mine could be bought in Woolworth's shop. So this was like a high street store. And it was basically some sort of pot, condoms, aniseed balls. All of these could be bought in Woolworths for quite cheap and then pulled together. Basically, the frogman, so the person who would risk their life to stick this mine onto the ship of the enemy and then swim away. But lots of these limpet mines were used during World War II. And if anyone was sort of keeping an eye on the news a couple of years ago, no, around 2021, there was a lot of references to limpet mines in the Gulf of Aden. So they seem to be returning in terms of popularity as a use in warfare a few years ago. So clearly, yeah, this is one example of where tenacity has been used to inspire a product, but there are lots of them out there. There's things like limpet labels and limpet grips and all sorts of things hanging on that tenacity thing. But of course, the shells themselves, okay, you've already been introduced to the giant Mexican limpet. Here's a physical version of it. This is Steve Hawkins, a good friend and colleague. I'm sure many of you know Steve. But this is Steve's his own personal Scutellastra Mexicana. He has told me it's in his will that he's gifting it to me. apparently this should be coming to me. So I have a very real reason to. But you can imagine animals that size, even our own ones that we're familiar with from these islands, you can imagine them used for some sort of purpose as implements and tools. And they certainly were used as implements and tools. You may not be expecting this. So this is something that actually was inspired by the Vikings. So this is an actual practice that the Vikings supposedly did do. They would use limpet shells for breastfeeding mothers. And the idea behind it was, well, I'm sure many of you are aware of these products, plastic products that are used in modern times. That is inspired by an actual practice using limpet shells. And this French company here, Bebe Necker, and I have an example here if anyone wants to see what these actually look like in the flesh. This is the website here, and you can see that you can buy these online. And the idea is they sit inside the bra and protect the nipple and prevent drying, and they create a little micro environment and reduce all sorts of issues. But I went onto the website. So when I discovered this, I was like, oh my God, one of my friends is pregnant. I need to get her some of these shells. And some of the questions on the online forum, I thought, we're good friends, but we're not that good friends for me to be asking such questions of her. So just to show you, one of the questions that they asked, that you won't be able to read this, it says diameter of the areola and then height of the whole tits. This has since changed. If you go on the website now, they don't use this language, but I got a bit of a laugh out of that myself, and I told my friend, I went for medium in the end, but in the end I told her that the website had this. We had a bit of a laugh over it, but these are marketed for €32 a pair, so there's huge business in this. And since I've actually spoken to this woman, since she started this, there has been like many other companies that have come up, particularly in Scandinavia, unsurprisingly. But she was the first. Okay, so well, apart from food, bait, inspiration, tools, and implements, why are limpets important? Well, this is where we get on to the second part. Okay, there's actually, I think this is relevant in terms of an inspiration art side of things. I hope you recognize Steve Hawkins, if you know him. This is Steve being painted on the inside of a limpet shell from the Azores. So if any of you have been to the Azores, you may have seen these limpet shells that are painted on the inside. I have some here to show you if you haven't seen them. But as part of Steve's retirement party in 2015, I had the idea to, what do you buy something like for him for his retirement? Do you get a painting commissioned or a tie or whatever? And then I realized, no, I get everyone to send limpet shells from all over the world, and I put it together in a display case, and I call it the Hawkins collection, which we did. And it was magic. Like, it was the most amazing experience to do that. But one person, Ricardo Santos, who was an MEP, he worked in the Azores on limpet fisheries for a long time. He commissioned this by a local artist in the Azores. And you can imagine the joy opening that one and presenting it to Steve at his retirement. So no, a really, really lovely story. Steve is a famous limpet ecologist. So he's one of the better known ones. So yeah, so Steve is answering that question here. He says, well, they're ecosystem engineers. Okay, and I'm sure we're all fairly familiar with ecosystem engineers. They can be either habitat forming, like trees and corals, mangroves, but they can also be habitat modifying. And the classic example in our textbooks would be beavers that chop down trees and build, to create dams. And these, of course, have profound effects on community structure and functioning. But limpets are not typically classed as ecosystem engineers. But if you start to think about their role in the ecosystem, what they do, they truly are ecosystem engineers. And we know that they're key grazers in many parts of the world, and definitely here in the Northeast Atlantic. Our limpets are very, very active. They're basically like the cows of the intertidal. They will keep the shore clear of algae. This is a picture of Steve's. He took a picture because it was a heart shape of the algae that had been shaped by the limpets grazing on it. And we know this because limpets have a feeding structure called the radula. I don't know, are you aware that the Patella vulgata, which is the most common species that we have on these shores, the tips of all of the teeth on the radula are tipped with a material called goethite, which is one of the strongest materials known in nature. So it's even stronger than spider silk. And if you imagine hundreds of thousands of limpets all grazing away with these really strong teeth, of course, that's going to have a profound effect on the algae. And that's just captured here in this image. This shore was pretty much devoid of algae, but lots of limpets and very smooth, which of course is also going to facilitate that. We found, though, in the UK, I've done a lot of work on artificial structures and urban environments. And this is an image from Plymouth, where I used to work for the last 10 years. And we found that on seawalls, particularly concrete or very smooth, featureless seawalls, you can get like really, really intense grazing. So like nothing else can survive. That seawall there, most of the little dots that you're looking at, they're limpets. The only other things, these larger things, are invasive Magellana gigas oysters and barnacles as well. There's very little else that's able to survive. And we assume it's down to just the overgrazing of limpets in this modified environment that has basically facilitated limpets to grow quite well, but also to feed very, very effectively. There's basically nowhere to escape from limpet grazing in that kind of environment. And we've even referred to these sort of artificial environments where you have this overgrazing as limpet barrens. Not to say like the limpets are bad, but this kind of situation isn't necessarily ideal. They're also bioeroders. Okay, we had pictures of pidux in the last talk. Thank you for that. But also limpets. Occasionally, it's very obvious to see that they actually really do carry out some quite important bioerosion. This is an image from not too far away from here. This is Garrettstown, and you can see a very obvious limpet scar there. Okay, and if you were closer, if the quality was better, you can actually very clearly see the radula marks in the rock. Garrettstown has quite a soft limestone rock. So obviously limestone rock being quite soft, it can easily get eroded by limpets. But this image here is Plymouth breakwater, and I've done a lot of work on Plymouth breakwater over the years. You have this really interesting situation where you have granite rock, obviously very hard, adjacent to limestone blocks right beside each other. Nearly 200 years old, 200 years of natural erosion and wave action, of course, is going to erode the limestone. And you can see the limestone has eroded to form these nice pools. If you drain the pools, which is what we did, and remove all of the limpets, which is also what we did, you'll see, and it's not so clear, the quality isn't great, pock marks, these little sort of depressions all over the rock, definitely formed by limpets. There's no doubt in my mind that that's formed by limpets. And you're all probably quite familiar with the urchin pockets, where urchins basically create these lovely pockets in the rock. Limpets are not necessarily known for this. Like, there's very few papers out there describing this function of limpets. So it's really quite an overlooked thing. But in this situation, these pools, which are sort of created partially by limpets, support more species than the surrounding emergent rock. And you have different sort of communities of species as well. So they're actually, their bioerosion function is having a role in terms of shaping biodiversity patterns in this context. So limpets are not necessarily known as habitat formers. So we've shown you that they can affect the environment through their activity, but they themselves are not typically known as habitat formers. Here's some of my holiday snaps from around the world. That's a limpet, and you can see there's lots of life living on that shell. Again, lots of life living on that one. There, that is a limpet underneath. Look at all the muscles only attached to the limpet. And this is a sargassum. Again, we had it in the last talk. Thank you, Declan. Sargassum, an invasive alga attached to a limpet there as well. So clearly they are habitat formers, and this is showing you images from many different species in different places. So I was quite interested in this whole idea of epibiosis is something that I really quite attracted to. If you look at that pool, and I'm sure you're going to see some lovely pools that look a bit like that over the week, the pink algae, the lithotamnion, is devoid of macroalgae. You can see green algae. I can tell you, if you put your hand in that water, every single one of those little tufts of algae has a limpet underneath. Okay, it is not attached to the rock, it is attached to the thing that eats it. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at the 3 different species of limpets that you get in the southwest of England, Patella ulispanensis, Patella vulgata, and that's Patella depressa down there. And we found that the vast majority of the situation where you get epibionts on it, it is predominantly Patella ulispanensis. We found that 80% of individuals that we found had epibionts on their shells. So really, this sort of pattern is driven by Patella ulispanensis. We also found that actually Patella ulispanensis in particular may be an overlooked vector of spread of the invasive alga Sargassum muticum into seagrass beds. Here's the image that I showed you before. Okay, you've got a limpet living on a rocky shore, natural habitat for the limpet, natural habitat for Sargassum. Attached to the shell of Sargassum, we had we basically looked at the prevalence of whether Sargassum was living on shells or not, and we found in 15% of cases where we found Sargassum, it was attached to limpet shells. So it's not massive, but it's enough. In seagrass beds, I had been speaking to colleagues. So after I showed one of my colleagues this picture, he was like, "Oh, one of his PhD students, when she was working in seagrass beds, she was looking at the effect of Sargassum on the seagrass beds, nothing to do with limpets. But he was telling me that most of the time, the Sargassum in the seagrass beds was attached to limpets. So this sparked my interest, and I was like, "Wait, we should have a look at this." So I had a student go and do some dive surveys in places around Plymouth, and you can't see it there, but it says 5% of cases. So there was quite a lot of Sargassum living in the seagrass beds. We only found 5% that were attached to limpets, but it certainly is providing us with the evidence that limpets can be a vector of spread into seagrass beds. So if you're thinking about sort of landscape ecology and landscape effects, this is a rocky shore organism facilitating an invasive into a seagrass bed. And we even found one shell, you still had the meat of the limpet still inside the shell, but it gets buried by the matrix, like by the rhizomes. So yes, I think there's something to be done here in the future. More work needs to be done. Okay, so we were also interested in looking at limpets living on each other. Okay, so limpet epibionts, and you can see the image here. There you have the basiobiont that's attached to the rock. There's its first epibiont, and then you have a third one. So we found evidence of 3 living together. And if you look at the curve on that, if that one dies, if that one goes off foraging and that one gets eaten by a bird, there's no way that one's going to survive. So it's pretty dodgy strategy, I would say, occupying the shell of a limpet. But we found it was primarily driven by competition for space. So when you had very little bare space, this is when you tend to see this situation, which won't surprise you. Okay, there's not much rock available. Okay, I can live on the hard substrate of a limpet. We also looked at the relative sort of proportions of which species were living on which. And we found that it was predominantly Patella vulgata that were supporting Patella vulgata. very little evidence of Ulysses penensis actually supporting any limpets on its shell. This feeds into the wider pattern that I was showing you with the algae on the shell. So remember that nice image with the green tufts of algae? Why is that? Okay, well, we think, this is Steve's observations now, I haven't seen this myself, he thinks that Patellulus penensis is aggressive and actually prevents mutual grazing on its shell. So he said that he's seen them literally clamping down and fighting off other limpets. In South Africa, this is really common, and actually in large limpets globally, large limpets often have mutual relationships with the algae that they're living on, and they are very territorial, and they will actually aggressively fight off individuals. And we did a lab experiment that investigated this to some degree, and we did find evidence that there is a possibility that this is a thing. We need to get GoPros and do it properly in the fields to really describe it. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility. Here is a limpet lifting up its shell and clamping down on a starfish predator. And you can see them even doing this in tanks, like inside as well. So this is something that's definitely anti-predator response. And you can imagine that they will also do it for competitors as well. As we're in Ireland, I have to share this with you. So you'll be going out in the field, I guess, over the next few days. I hope you come across Patellulus penensis, like the star of this talk. In Irish, Patellulus penensis is known as an Fiach Báirneach, which means the wild limpet. So if you just allow me to read this out, this is absolutely brilliant. So I showed you the image of the starfish. Okay, well, they've been known to be aggressive and actually lifting their shells and clamping down on other predators as well. And this one here, as you can see, the Fiach Báirneach as a rat catcher. Of a soft evening, then Báirneachs do rise up and go travelling a bit over the rocks. And the rat will come up and slip her tongue to lick the meat, and the Báirneach will clap down its shell and catch her by the tongue. And I tell you, the power of man couldn't loose the hold of the Báirneach, and the rat is caught there till the tide comes in up and drowns her. I seen them myself hanging there by the tongue, and they dead. So this account was confirmed by several Clare Island men. The capture of a rat by a limpet is also on record in the Scottish island of Dunstafnage. And I did find that other evidence from Dunstafnage as well. So they're not just doing it on Clare Island. But this evidence of clamping down on predators has also been seen in birds, foxes, and cats, would you believe? So limpets are not just sitting ducks waiting to be taken by whatever is there. They can fight back and they can fight their corner. Respect. All right, so thinking about limpets as ecosystem engineers, you look in the literature, there's nobody referring to them as ecosystem engineers. Okay, this is not something that people typically do, but they definitely are. And I hope I've convinced you of that. They're definitely habitat modifiers. I've shown you the intense grazing, okay, which is a trophic interaction rather than, but I still think that could help to classify them as a habitat modifier. But clearly, if they're eroding rocks and causing the wider cascading effects, I think that definitely says that they are habitat modifiers. Probably the most famous example of this bioerosion function is from the southeast of England. We're all very familiar with the Cliffs of Dover, the beautiful white UNESCO World Heritage Site. This quirky study from 2000 was actually looking at the potential effect of limpets on the natural erosion of the chalk shore in the vicinity of the Cliffs of Dover. And they actually found in places where limpets were very abundant, up to 25% of the erosion of the cliffs or the shoreline was attributed to limpets. That's huge, I think. And this was actually picked up by the media. This is genuine. Okay, this is actually, I did not doctor this. This is literally the headline. Limpets threaten the coast. When part of Beachy Head fell into the channel last year, everyone blamed rising sea levels and storms. Nobody fingered the Patella vulgata, otherwise known as the humble limpet. Bit sensationalist, but clearly it just shows you that, yeah, limpets are important bioeroders. I'm linking it to something as iconic as the Cliffs of Dover is pretty interesting. But they're also habitat formers. Okay, so I've shown you some evidence from our own work where they're islands for algae, and it's thought that this is this pattern emerges as a form of associational defense. Basically, we think that the limpets are aggressive and territorial, and they prevent mutual grazing on their shells, hence that pattern. And you also saw evidence that they are substrate for juveniles. George Branch, who is probably the #1 limpet biologist on Earth, I've had the privilege of talking to him about limpets and being on the shore with them. And I was particularly interested in epibiosis when I met him on the shore in Cape Town. And he was showing me their wonderful scutellaster cochlear, which I will show you here. Hard to see. That's the outline of the individual. These are the longest living limpets in the world. They can grow to 35 years old. Can you imagine? And you can see there's some epibionts, and then you have a third one there. George told me that he has seen one cochlear with 52 individuals living on its shell, one for every week of the year. Pretty impressive stuff. So they clearly are habitat for other limpets as well. And this is something that you do see globally. It's not just 2 examples. Okay, so back to the start. Okay, so the spy living in plain sight. Okay, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Well, as I say, I bore myself, and I'd like to sort of liven up my talks. I thought I'm going to turn this DVD cover into the equivalent, but for limpets. It took me hours. I hope you enjoy this. Patellius vanensis, grazer, facilitator, food, sculptor. And they got Shackleton in there, perhaps the most overlooked ecosystem engineer and service provider of our time. And I'll just, if you just allow me, just side by side, I think that's pretty good. Pretty good. Colin Firth, I happen to be called Louise Firth, no relation. But yeah, no, just it was fun. I enjoyed doing that, and I'm very proud of it. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed giving this talk. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's quite a safe space to be so enthusiastic. But have I convinced you that they are ecosystem engineers and they provide very important ecosystem services? Preaching to the choir. Thank you.